My name is Emily Carter, and I never imagined that a single night could change everything I thought I knew about family, pain, and myself. I was 19 when I started working in the small bakery tucked into a quiet corner of Cleveland, Ohio. Everyone in my town knew my face, if not my name. I had early mornings, flour in my hair, and dreams that smelled like fresh bread and sugar. Some people think baking is simple mixing ingredients, following a recipe. They're wrong. Baking is an art, a science, and for me, it was my lifeline. It was the only place where I could breathe, where I could feel like I mattered. That night, I had stayed late, finishing a batch of sourdough for a catering order the next morning. My hands were scorched from the oven's heat over the years, but I didn't mind. I loved it too much to complain. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. The oven door jammed mid-cycle, and when I forced it open, flames erupted with a roar I could never unhear. I screamed. I screamed like my lungs had never been used before. The fire kissed my arms, my shoulders, and my neck. I felt my skin blistering, my body weakening, but worse than the pain was the fear in my chest. The realization that this was more than an accident. My life, as I knew it, had changed forever. I don't remember the ambulance ride clearly. I remember the smell of smoke mixed with antiseptic, the bright lights of the eye, and the whispered instructions of the nurses as they wrapped me in bandages. And then I heard it, the sound that made my heart sink deeper than the flames ever could. "You're just a baker." It was my sister, Madison Carter. My older sister, my golden, perfect, untouchable sister. She had always had the flawless hair, the perfect apartment, the high-paying corporate job, and the kind of confidence that could silence a room. I loved her once, deeply, before she became someone who measured everyone's worth with a salary or a LinkedIn profile. But hearing those words from her in front of the nurses, in front of my parents, in front of strangers, was like a blow I didn't expect. I smiled through the tears, not because I agreed, not because I forgave her, but because I realized something profound. She didn't define me. No one did. I lay there in the hospital bed, my arms covered in burns, the skin raw and red. Every movement sent bolts of pain through my body. The nurses fussed over me, checking vitals, applying ointment, giving me morphine that barely touched the ache. My parents hovered, whispering between themselves, worried about bills, worried about insurance, worried about appearances, and Madison. She stood at the foot of my bed, arms crossed, judging, disapproving, completely unable to understand what courage looked like. The truth is, I didn't expect her to understand. I never had. When we were kids, she would win everything, grades, awards, attention, and I would always be the quiet one in the corner, kneading dough, drawing shapes in flour, listening to the world pass me by. I loved baking then, just as I loved it now, but it was never enough for her. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't marketable. It wasn't a job with a corner office or a flashy paycheck. And in that moment, when she screamed at me, I realized that it didn't matter. I was standing in the ashes of my old life, and for the first time, I understood something powerful. Their opinions didn't matter anymore. Spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks with my eyes, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. I thought about the countless mornings I had risen before dawn to knead dough and create magic in a small kitchen. I thought about the long nights I had spent experimenting with recipes, hoping that someday someone would recognize my work. And I thought about Madison and how her words, meant to humiliate, had instead lit a fire inside me, a fire that would never be extinguished. I smiled through the tears because I realized that this was only the beginning. The burns on my skin were temporary. The betrayal of my sister stung, but is also a lesson. And deep in my chest, behind the pain and the fear, I felt the first flickers of determination. I would show them all. Not with screaming, not with confrontation, but with something far more powerful: success. That night, lying in the hospital bed, I made a silent promise to myself. I would survive. I would rise. And one day, the world and Madison would see that Emily Carter was never just a baker dot after that night in the hospital. Life didn't get easier. In fact, it got harder physically, emotionally, and in ways I hadn't imagined. The burns were only the beginning. The real wounds were the ones invisible to everyone else, the ones carved into my self-worth by people I thought would always stand by me. I thought family was supposed to love you, protect you, remind you that you matter. Apparently, I was wrong. Madison had always been Madison. Perfect, untouchable, the kind of person who could walk into a room and make it about her without anyone noticing. Growing up, she had everything: grades, attention, friends, opportunities. And then there was me, Emily, the quiet one, kneading dough in the corner, dreaming big in silence. I loved baking with all my heart, but Madison never understood. Emily, she'd say, arms crossed, voice sharp as glass. You could be someone important if you just stopped wasting time with this pastry nonsense. I'd nod, smile, and go back to the flour, the yeast, the sugar, silently wondering why my heart was never enough. When the accident happened, I expected my sister to panic, to cry, to be scared for me. I thought she would hold my hand, whisper words of comfort. But what I got instead was disdain and shame. I remember her pacing outside my hospital room, tapping her heels, rolling her eyes, muttering to our parents about the embarrassment and the mess we now have to deal with. My parents looked anxious, hovering over me with worry, and I appreciated their concern, but even they seemed to measure my value by how inconvenient my accident had become. And Madison, she didn't even try. I could feel her eyes on me, not with love, but with judgment. She didn't see her little sister burned and scared. She saw a reflection of everything she considered weak and worthless. That sentence she screamed, "You're just a baker," wasn't just cruel. It was a declaration, a verdict, a statement about who I was and who I would never be in her eyes. I spent hours thinking about her words while lying in that hospital bed. At first, they hurt. They burned more than the flames had, stabbing me deeper than the physical pain ever could. I cried myself to sleep, my arms stiff, my chest tight, the bandages itchy and suffocating. But slowly, something changed. With every tear, every pang of humiliation, a spark of determination grew inside me. She wanted me small. She wanted me broken. She wanted me silent. Well, I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. I realized that this wasn't just about the accident. It was about my entire life. Madison had always looked down on me because she didn't understand my choices, because she measured success in numbers, in status, in prestige. She didn't see passion. She didn't see resilience. She didn't see heart. But I saw her. I saw her insecurity disguised as superiority. And I saw the one thing she couldn't control, me. The recovery was brutal. Every day was a battle with pain, both physical and emotional. Skin grafts left my arms stiff and scarred. Morphine made the world blurry, but it couldn't dull the sharp sting of her judgment. She barely visited. When she did, she spoke in clipped sentences, made small comments about my appearance, my future, my limited prospects. And each time I smiled through the pain, remembering her words. Not in anger, but as fuel. I also began to notice something else. Family gatherings, dinners, holidays. They were all arenas where Madison thrived and I shrank. I had spent years allowing her to dominate, to belittle, to make me feel small. But now, with every insult, every dismissive glance, I was learning patience, strategy, and resolve. My mind started forming plans, not of revenge in the violent sense, but of silent triumph. One day I would show her, not by confrontation, but by action, by success she couldn't ignore. And slowly, I started dreaming again. Not the quiet dreams of a young baker kneading dough at dawn, hoping someone would notice. These were bigger, louder, fierce dreams of a bakery that wasn't just a bakery. A bakery that would carry my name. A bakery that would force her and the world to recognize me. For the first time in years, lying in that hospital bed, I felt hope not soft or fragile, but blazing like the fire that had nearly taken me. Madison had underestimated me. My family had underestimated me, but I would rise from these ashes. And one day, they would see that Emily Carter was never just anything. The weeks after I left the hospital were the hardest of my life. Not because of the pain, though my arms burned with every movement, but because I had nothing left. My job at the bakery had ended the day after the accident, replaced by someone younger, faster, and more capable. My apartment felt colder than ever, the walls closing in like they knew I'd lost. And Madison. She didn't call. She didn't visit. She posted photos of her life on social media while I counted my pills and tried not to cry every time. I saw the scars on my arms that I sold my car to pay for some of the medical bills. I moved into a tiny studio apartment downtown, barely enough space for a bed and a small kitchen. I hadn't cooked for anyone but myself in weeks. Even the simplest task like boiling water felt impossible. The burns had stiffened my fingers. My joints ached. And the hospital bills, they piled up like a mountain I could never climb. I was broke. I was broken. And I was alone. People, neighbors, friends, even distant relatives tried to help in ways that only reminded me how powerless I felt. They said, "At least you're alive," or "You'll bounce back." But their words sounded hollow. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. Baking wasn't just a job for me, it was my soul. And now my soul felt scorched. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, thinking about Madison's words, how she had laughed at me in the hospital, how she had judged me for being just a baker. Every time I replayed it in my mind, a spark grew, not of anger exactly, but of determination. She had underestimated me. Everyone had underestimated me. And I realized that now, more than ever, I had a choice. Let life crush me, or fight back in the only way I knew how, silently, deliberately, and smartly. So I did what I had always done when the world seemed impossible. I baked. It wasn't easy. My hands shook. The scar tissue made kneading dough painful. I burned more loaves than I cared to count. The first time I tried to bake a sourdough bowl, it came out flat and uneven, the crust charred. I cried over it, but then I tried again, and again, and again. Each failure taught me something new. Each loaf that rose properly felt like a small victory. For the first time in weeks, I felt alive. I started experimenting late into the night. I made desserts no one had tried before, bread with flavors that seemed impossible to combine, pastries that melted in your mouth. My small kitchen became a laboratory of ideas and determination. Every batch of dough I shaped, every oven I preheated, was a step toward reclaiming myself. And slowly, quietly, my confidence began to return. I didn't tell anyone, not Madison, not my parents, that I was baking again. It wasn't about approval. It wasn't about recognition. It was about proving to myself that I could survive, that I could thrive, that I could take the ashes of my old life and create something beautiful. I also began journaling my ideas, my recipes, my thoughts. I wrote about my dreams of a bakery I would own, a bakery that would be my sanctuary and my statement, a bakery that no one could mock, no one could dismiss. I imagined lines stretching down the street, people waiting just to taste my creations. I imagined a place where I could employ people who, like me, had been overlooked, underestimated. or burned by life. And for the first time since the accident, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Hope doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the still voice inside you that whispers, "You can do this. You will rise." And that whisper was all I needed to begin my climb back from rock bottom. I didn't know yet how I would do it. I didn't know when the world would notice me. But I knew this. I would no longer be defined by Madison's words. I would no longer be just a baker. And if anyone doubted me, especially her, they would soon see exactly what Emily Carter was capable of. Because sometimes the bitter taste of rock bottom is exactly what makes the sweetest rise possible. It was a rainy Thursday when my life started to shift. Though at the time it felt like any other miserable day. I had been baking for hours in my tiny apartment kitchen, my fingers stiff and blistered, my arms aching with every motion. Flour dusted the counters and my clothes, and the smell of burnt sugar hung heavy in the air. I had just pulled a tray of experimental cinnamon rolls from the oven, one batch perfectly golden, another charred beyond hope, when there was a knock at the door. At first, I didn't move. Who would come here? The building was mostly empty, and I had stopped expecting visitors months ago. Another knock, louder, more insistent. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door. Standing there was Mr. Harris, a middle-aged man with a warm smile and paint-stained hands. I recognized him immediately. He used to pick up deliveries from my old bakery before the accident. "Emily Carter?" he asked, his voice cautious but kind. "I heard about what happened. I hope you're doing okay." I blinked. No one had asked that in months. Not Madison, not my parents, not the neighbors who glanced at me with pity. "I'm surviving," I said, forcing a smile. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, peering at my counters, at the half-finished loaves, at the flour smeared on my cheeks. "I've tasted your baking before," he said, nodding toward the trays. "I've always remembered it." "And I heard you're still baking." I shrugged. "I bake. That's all I can do." "No, Emily," he said, leaning closer. "What you do is more than baking. You create. You bring people joy. And I want to help you share that with the world." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. "Help me?" I asked cautiously. I didn't trust hope anymore. Not after Madison's words, not after everything I had endured. "Yes," he said. "I'm thinking of starting a small food venture, a single truck. Nothing fancy, and I need someone who can craft unique recipes, someone who understands flavor, technique. Someone like you." I laughed, bitterly at first, then stopped when I realized he was serious. I can't," I said. I'm not ready for anything like that." My fingers trembled as I tried to push the thought away. He shook his head. "Emily, you're already ready. You've been through fire, literally. You've survived everything life threw at you. This could be your chance, but you have to try." I thought about Madison, about her smirk at the hospital, about the endless ridicule, the laughter, the words meant to diminish me. For a split second, I imagined telling him no, shrinking into my old life of tiny apartments, blistered hands, and lonely nights. But then I remembered the quiet fire inside me, the one that had started the moment she screamed, "Just a baker." I nodded. "Okay," I said, finally. "I'll try." And that was it, the first real step toward rebuilding my life. We started small. One food truck, one recipe at a time. I designed each item, tested flavors until they were perfect, experimented with twists on classics no one had dared to try. People came. Word spread. Slowly, the line in front of the truck grew longer, until I started to realize something I hadn't felt in months: hope. Didn't tell anyone, especially Madison, about this venture. She didn't need to see it. She didn't deserve the satisfaction of knowing I was working while she flaunted her perfect life online. This was mine. All mined up by the third month, the truck had a small but loyal following. Customers raved about my bread bowls, my pastries, my inventive combinations. Each smile, each compliment, each request for more, these were my fuel. For the first time since the accident, I felt powerful, capable, and alive. And slowly, I began to understand a truth that would guide me from now on. Success isn't about being loud or demanding respect. Success is quiet. It's persistence. It's resilience. It's showing up day after day while the world underestimates you. I had survived fire. I had survived my sister's cruelty. And now I was beginning to rise one loaf, one pastry, one satisfied customer at a time. I didn't know how far I could go. I didn't know if Madison would ever see me again. But for the first time, I believed in something that felt more powerful than hope itself. I could win without anyone's approval. And that, I realized, would be the sweetest revenge, if you want. I can continue with part 5 next. 650 plus words, where Emily's success starts too. By the time summer rolled around, my life had changed in ways I never imagined. The food truck, our first small, beat-up blue and white vehicle, was no longer just a patchwork idea I clung to. It had become a living, breathing proof of everything I had endured. Lines formed outside before we even opened, people texting their friends, Instagram posts tagging the location with comments like, "Best bread bowls ever worth the drive." And yet, despite this success, I kept my identity hidden. I wasn't ready for Madison or anyone else to know. This wasn't a story for pity or gossip or family bragging rights. This was my sanctuary, my revenge in waiting. My hands, still scarred and stiff, crafted every recipe. My kitchen, though cramped and cluttered, was my battlefield, and every loaf that came out perfectly golden felt like a quiet victory over the world that had doubted me. Most days, I worked from dawn to midnight, kneading, shaping, tasting, adjusting. Sleep was optional. Pain was optional. Everything else, the bills, the loneliness, the weight of scars, didn't matter. Because I was creating something lasting, something that could not be mocked, ignored, or destroyed by anyone, even Madison. It was during one particularly busy week that fate decided to nudge me closer to her world. One of the trucks had been booked for a corporate catering event in Chicago. The company? Madison's firm. My heart froze when I realized it. My first thought was panic. She recognized me. She mocked me. She ruined this for me. But then I reminded myself I didn't need to prove anything yet. Not here, not now. I had grown silent for months, and silence had served me well. I arrived at the corporate building early, wearing an apron and a baseball cap pulled low over my eyes. My truck was set up outside, the smell of freshly baked bread wafting through the streets. Inside, Madison was busy giving orders, fussing over last-minute details. Completely unaware that the person delivering her catering was her little sister, the girl she had laughed at, mocked, and dismissed. When she walked out to check the setup, I caught a glimpse of her. The smirk on her face made my blood boil, but I held my tongue. I watched as she inspected the trays of my creations with a critical eye, tasting, frowning, and muttering. This isn't anything special. They're just trendy little breads, not real culinary skill. I felt my fists clench behind the counter, but I smiled. Quietly, patiently, I watched as the first batch of clients sampled the food. The expressions on their faces told me everything. Eyes widening, smiles spreading, napkins hastily pulled out to mop up crumbs. Comments like, "This is incredible," and "We need more of this for every meeting," buzzed through the air. Madison's smirk faltered, but she didn't yet realize who I was. For a brief moment, I imagined confronting her. screaming, yelling, telling her exactly what I had been through, how she had mocked me, how she had tried to destroy my confidence. But I didn't, because this moment was already sweeter than anything she could give me. The people in front of her, her clients, her boss, were tasting and praising my work. And she had no idea. I slipped back behind the counter, hands moving automatically as I served bread bowls and pastries with precision. Each compliment from a client was like a brick in the fortress I was building, one she would eventually have no choice but to notice. And even if she never acknowledged me, even if she never apologized, the knowledge that I had quietly, successfully created something remarkable was enough. As the day ended and the truck packed up to return to its route, I realized how far I had come. From burned skin, from ridicule, from loneliness, from being called just a baker, I had transformed. Madison's ignorance was my shield. Her arrogance had fueled my fire. I didn't need her validation. I didn't need her recognition. I only needed this, proof that I could rise quietly, powerfully, and in ways she could never predict. The best part? This was only the beginning. I drove the truck back to my tiny apartment, exhausted, exhilarated, and more determined than ever. I couldn't wait to see where this path would lead. I couldn't wait for the day when Madison would finally see not just the baker, but the woman who had survived, fought, and won in silence. And deep inside I smiled, because when that day came, her shock, her disbelief, and her silence would be worth more than any words I could ever scream at her. I was no longer invisible. I was rising, and soon everyone, including Madison, would know it. The night of the corporate launch in Chicago arrived, and I felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement. My hands, still scarred from the fire months ago, trembled slightly as I adjusted the apron around my waist. I had done this hundreds of times in my tiny kitchen, in the food truck, but this was different. This was Madison's world, her people, her clients. And she had no idea that the baker for the event she had hired was me, the sister she had mocked. Dismissed and humiliated, the event hall was massive. All glass walls and polished floors, glowing under chandeliers that made Madison look even more perfect and untouchable than usual. She was in her element, checking tables, adjusting flowers, giving orders with a clipped efficiency that made everyone around her follow her like she was the queen of the room. My stomach twisted, but I reminded myself why I was there. Not for revenge and the dramatic, shouting kind, but for recognition. Quiet, undeniable, earned recognition. The head chef assigned to the event approached me, his eyes apologetic. "I have to step out for a moment. Can you handle the rest?" he asked. I nodded, heart hammering, though every instinct screamed at me to stay calm. I stepped out onto the event floor, carrying a tray of my pastries. And that's when I saw her. Madison was leaning over the dessert table, taking a bite of one of my signature creations, a caramel drizzled bread pudding, and her smirk faltered. She chewed slowly, as though she didn't understand what she was tasting. And then finally she looked up, her eyes widened. Her perfect composure cracked, and she froze. Time seemed to slow. I walked toward her, each step deliberate, confident, strong. The chatter of the event faded in my ears. I could see recognition dawning in her face, the sudden realization of who I was, of what she had underestimated. "Emily?" she whispered, voice trembling. I stopped in front of her, keeping my voice calm, steady. No shaking, no tears, no anger, just quiet power. "Yes," I said, placing the tray down and letting the light catch the scars on my arms. "It's me, Emily Carter, founder and owner." The room went silent for a moment, though not everyone knew why. Her clients looked from her to me, confused. The head chef came back and stared, realizing what had happened. Madison's mouth opened, closed, opened again. and all the words she might have said evaporated into disbelief. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to explain. I let the silence do the work. Her eyes, wide and unsteady, told me everything. She had thought she knew me. She had thought I was weak, fragile, unimportant, and now she was staring at the very proof that she had been wrong. I smiled quietly, not cruelly, not triumphantly, just calmly. The kind of smile that says, I have survived, I have endured, and I have risen. Her lips quivered, but she couldn't find the words. She wanted to say something, but everything she could think of sounded petty, shallow, or meaningless in the face of the reality she couldn't deny. The clients began tasting the pastries again, complimenting me openly now, oblivious to the family drama unfolding. "This is incredible," one said. "Who made this?" I simply nodded and said, "I did," letting the words hang in the air. Madison's face went pale. She looked like someone who had just realized that her little sister, the one she had sneered at, was no longer invisible, no longer powerless, and no longer just a baker. I turned and moved down the line, serving the pastries to the guests. Madison followed silently, but she didn't say a word. I could feel her panic, her shock, her disbelief. And it was perfect. For months, I had imagined this moment, not in anger, but in clarity. The world had doubted me. She had doubted me. And here, in front of everyone, she was confronted with the truth. I was no longer the quiet, timid girl who could be dismissed. I was Emily Carter, the woman who had survived fire, ridicule, and betrayal, and who now commanded respect without demanding it. As I looked back at Madison, still frozen in disbelief, I realized something important. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need her recognition. I only needed to stand there, let my work speak, and let her see the power of resilience. The night ended with applause, compliments, and inquiries about future collaborations. Madison left quietly, humiliated, unsure of what to say, while I stayed behind, exhausted, exhilarated, and more alive than I had ever felt. And in that moment, I understood the sweetest kind of revenge, success that no one, not even those who doubted you the most, could take away. After the Chicago event, life began to shift in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. Madison didn't call. She didn't confront me. She didn't apologize. And honestly, I didn't expect her to. I realized that the most satisfying revenge wasn't in yelling or drama. It was in proving, quietly, relentlessly, that I was stronger, smarter, and more capable than anyone who had ever doubted me. The corporate clients who had tasted my pastries at the launch event weren't just impressed, they were obsessed. They started requesting weekly deliveries, customized orders, and exclusive recipes. Emails flooded in from catering coordinators, event planners, and even local restaurant owners asking for collaborations. I stayed calm, letting the offers pile up while continuing to work in my tiny kitchen and food truck. Each order I filled was another quiet victory, a whisper of triumph that Madison would never hear unless she looked closely, and eventually, she would. It wasn't long before the ripple effects reached her world. Madison's firm had taken pride in that corporate event, expecting to impress clients with the catering they had chosen. But as the clients raved loudly about my baking, Madison's professional judgment began to look flawed. She had scoffed at the trendy little bakery, dismissed it as a gimmick, and yet now the same clients were insisting on long-term partnerships with me. She tried to redirect the credit to her team, to the head chef, to anyone but me. But there was no denying it. I was the reason the event had succeeded. And slowly, quietly, Madison's credibility began to erode. I watched it happen from a distance. Not because I wanted to humiliate her publicly, but because life itself was doing the work I had dreamed of. She had underestimated me, just as everyone else had. And now, while she scrambled to save face, I was quietly building a name that couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, my food truck business began to expand. We added a second truck, then a third, each one showcasing my creations in different neighborhoods. People started recognizing me on the street, asking for tips, snapping photos. I began experimenting with specialty breads, desserts inspired by travel, and signature pastries that carried my personality in every bite. Each success felt like a brick in the fortress I was building, a fortress no one could knock down. Not even Madison, and Madison, still unaware of just how far I had risen, tried everything she could to regain control of her world. She attempted to claim credit for the catering event internally, suggesting to her bosses that the success had been team-driven. Her colleagues, however, had been hearing directly from the clients, and slowly whispers of doubt about her competence began circulating. Every time I thought about it, I couldn't help but smile, not cruelly, but with satisfaction. The world was finally aligning with what I had always known. My talent, my drive, and my resilience mattered far more than her opinions ever could. Then came the emails. One after another, companies requesting partnerships, interviews, collaborations. I responded professionally, carefully, quietly, without revealing the drama that fueled my rise. I wanted nothing to be personal. I wanted everything to be earned. And the more I worked, the more my reputation grew, quietly eclipsing Madison's. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Madison. She didn't say, "Congratulations." She didn't even ask to talk. She simply wrote, "Can we meet? We need to talk about everything." I read it, smiled, and didn't respond immediately. This wasn't a time for drama. This wasn't a time for reconciliation, at least not yet. This was a moment to savor. She wanted dialogue now, after all the proof had become undeniable. And I realized that my revenge didn't require confrontation. It didn't require shouting. It didn't even require me to stoop to anger. My success, my calm, my quiet rise was already more powerful than any argument she could have ever made. I had survived fire, humiliation, and neglect. I had rebuilt myself from ashes, and with every client, every order, every compliment, I reinforced the truth. I was not just a baker. I was unstoppable. And Madison, for the first time, had no idea how to stop me today. When I look at my bakery, I still have to pinch myself to believe it's real. The same Emily who had once been called just a baker now owns a bustling brick-and-mortar bakery in downtown Cleveland, complete with a team of passionate employees, a line out the door every morning, and a reputation that stretches beyond the city. But this success isn't measured in dollars or media mentions. It's measured in resilience, in survival, and in the lives I've touched along the way, including my own. After the food trucks took off, I poured every ounce of energy into expanding. I hired a small team, training them myself, teaching them not just recipes, but the pride and precision that go into each loaf, each pastry, each creation. I refused to cut corners, refused to settle for mediocrity. The bakery became a symbol not just of my work, but of endurance. Every customer who tasted a dessert or a bread bowl understood, even unconsciously, that this was more than baking. It was love, effort, and a story kneaded into every bite. One of the most important choices I made was who I wanted to work with. I hired burn survivors, single mothers, people who had been overlooked by society or underestimated by those around them. My kitchen became a sanctuary, a place where everyone knew they were valued, where mistakes weren't failures but lessons. And every time I looked at them, I saw a reflection of myself, resilient, strong, unbroken. Madison. She never came back into my life. After the corporate launch event and the client's unwavering praise, she tried in small, tentative ways to reconnect texts, calls, even a few social media messages. but I ignored most of them. I have forgiven her quietly, yes, but forgiveness doesn't mean opening the door for someone who tried to diminish you. I had grown too much, become too strong, and my life no longer revolved around her validation. There were moments, though, when her words from the hospital, the ones that had cut deeper than the fire, crept back into my mind. "You're just a baker." I'd feel that sting and then smile, because every pastry, every bread loaf, every satisfied customer proved the opposite. I wasn't just anything. I was everything I had chosen to become: strong, independent, skilled, resilient. An uncheckable dot the first time I walked into my new bakery fully ready for business. I stopped at the door and took a deep breath. The smell of yeast and fresh bread filled my senses. The counters gleamed, the ovens hummed, and my team moved with energy and pride. I thought about the hospital bed, about the nights spent crying in my tiny apartment, about Madison's laughter. And I realized something I hadn't understood fully until that moment. The fire she thought had destroyed me had forged me instead. The first customers arrived, and I greeted each one personally, smiling through scars I had once hidden in shame. I saw families enjoying pastries together, coworkers sharing bread bowls, kids with flour on their cheeks and wide eyes staring at the chocolate croissants. And in their joy, I found my own. I named the bakery Phoenix and Flower. It was a reminder that from the ashes, life could rise. From pain, beauty could grow. From neglect and cruelty, strength could bloom. I wanted everyone who walked through the doors to feel that hope. Determination and resilience dot sometimes. At night, I think about Madison, about the little girl I once was, the sister she looked down on, the girl who had been burned in more ways than one. I think about how far I've come, and I smile, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with quiet satisfaction. Because the fire didn't destroy me. It built me. It shaped me. And it showed me who I truly am. I am Emily Carter. I am not just a baker. I am a survivor. I am a creator. I am unstoppable. And I have proven to the world and to myself that no one can define my worth except me. So if you're listening to my story now, remember this: the people who belittle you, who dismiss your dreams, who try to make you feel small, they are not the measure of your life. Only your rise, build, create, and never forget. Your fire, your scars, your passion, they make you unstoppable. And that finally is my victory.